Do you know the most terrifying thing about betrayal? It never comes from a stranger. It arrives in my mailbox on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, signed in my exact handwriting. It is just a flimsy piece of paper carrying a $560,000 debt for a house I have never seen. When the identity thief shares my own blood, revenge is no longer about clearing my credit. It is about burning down the entire definition of family. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us now. Let's begin the story. My name is Cora Meyer. I am 34 years old, and my entire professional life revolves around anticipating disasters. As a senior risk analyst at Aegis Core Security here in Seattle, I spend my days evaluating vulnerabilities, patching corporate blind spots, and ensuring that no unpredictable variables can collapse the carefully structured systems of our clients. My own life was structured with that same exact precision. I lived in a meticulously organized apartment. I checked my credit report quarterly, and I never left a single variable to chance. I believed that if you built the fortress walls high enough and thick enough, nothing could ever breach them. That illusion of control shattered on a rainy Tuesday evening. I had just returned home from a grueling 10-hour shift. The Seattle rain was pouring down in thick sheets, soaking my trench coat as I fumbled for my mailbox key. Inside the small metal compartment sat a thin, unassuming envelope from a financial institution I had never done business with. It had the bold red stamp of a collections notice. Usually, I would toss junk mail directly into the recycling bin, but the clear plastic window of the envelope displayed my full legal name, impeccably printed. I tore it open, standing right there in the damp lobby of my building. The paper inside was cold, clinical, and devastating. It outlined a demand for immediate payment. According to the document, I was in default on a mortgage. The total amount owed was $560,000. The account was 14 months past due. Below the terrifying financial figure, the document listed my personal identifiers with chilling accuracy. My date of birth was correct. The last 4 digits of my Social Security number were correct. My analytical brain immediately categorized this as an elaborate phishing scam. Identity theft attempts were common, and fraudsters often used publicly available information to intimidate people into calling fake hotlines. I did not panic. Instead, I went upstairs, brewed a cup of black coffee, and opened my laptop. I bypassed the phone number printed on the notice and independently searched for the bank's official corporate number. When I dialed the customer service line, the hold music looped for what felt like an eternity before a representative named Brenda answered. "Good evening. How can I assist you today?" she asked in a cheerful tone. "Hello. My name is Cora Meyer. I received a collections notice in the mail today for a mortgage I do not recognize. I believe there has been a mistake or an incident of identity fraud," I said, my voice steady and professional. "I can help look into that for you. Ms. Meyer, can I have your full Social Security number to pull up the account?" I hesitated, then provided the numbers. I heard the clacking of her keyboard. The brief silence that followed felt heavy. "Ms. Meyer," Brenda's tone shifted, losing its bright customer service polish. "I am looking at the account right now. This loan is very real. It is a residential mortgage finalized 4 years ago, and it is currently in severe delinquency. Foreclosure proceedings are scheduled to begin next month." My stomach dropped. "That is impossible. I rent an apartment in Seattle. I have never owned a home. Where is this property located?" "The property is a luxury suburban estate located in Cypress Ridge, Texas," she replied calmly. I had never even set foot in the state of Texas. The geographical impossibility made no sense. How could someone purchase a luxury estate across the country in my name without triggering a single alert on my standard credit checks? "I need you to send me the complete loan origination file," I demanded, gripping the phone tightly. "Send it to my email immediately. I need to see the signatures." Brenda agreed to escalate the request. And within 2 hours, a secured PDF arrived in my inbox. I sat alone in the dark glow of my monitor, opening the file. The document was over 50 pages long. I scrolled directly to the final page, searching for the borrower's signature. When my eyes landed on the ink, the breath vanished from my lungs. It was not a sloppy forgery, it was a masterpiece. The loops, the slant, the sharp cross of the T in my last name. It was a 99% match to my own handwriting. This was not the work of a random hacker on the dark web. A stranger could steal a social security number, but they could not replicate the muscular memory of my hand. This level of imitation required access. It required observation. It required someone who had watched me sign my name hundreds of times and had spent hours practicing it in secret. A cold, creeping dread paralyzed my fingers as I scrolled back up to the first page to examine the applicant information. Under the emergency contact section, there was a name and a phone number. I knew the 10 digits by heart. It was the old phone number of Arthur Meyer. Arthur Meyer was not just a name on a piece of paper. He was my father. He was the model single parent, the man I had worshipped and trusted implicitly since my mother passed away 15 years ago. He was the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who paid for my college, who called me every Sunday evening to ask about my week. The fortress walls had not been breached from the outside. The enemy had been living inside the keep the entire time. I did not sleep that night. I sat frozen in my desk chair as the hours ticked by, the glow of the monitor casting long, distorted shadows across my apartment walls. My mind, usually so disciplined and capable of compartmentalizing data, descended into a frantic, chaotic spiral. Every memory I had of my father over the past decade began to warp, bleeding from warm nostalgia into sinister calculation. The solid ground beneath my feet felt as though it was turning into ash. Arthur had always played the part of the ultimate self-sacrificing parent. After my mother died, he never remarried. He lived in a remarkably modest, cramped apartment in the suburbs just outside the city limits. He drove a 10-year-old sedan and wore the same worn-out coats winter after winter. Whenever I offered to buy him something nice with my corporate salary, he would wave me off with a gentle smile, insisting he needed very little to be happy. His career as an independent retail consultant required him to travel constantly. He was always on a plane, spending weeks at a time on the road, supposedly analyzing inventory systems for regional chains across the country. I had always admired his tireless work ethic. Now, the very thought of his business trips made bile rise in my throat. Then, a specific memory pierced through the haze, sharp and undeniable. It happened exactly 3 years ago during one of our Sunday dinners. He had poured us both a glass of cheap wine, looked me in the eyes with profound paternal warmth, and told me he was updating his life insurance policy. "I am not getting any younger, Cora," he had said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "I want to make sure my little girl is fully protected if anything ever happens to me. The brokers are sticklers for documentation now. I need a clear scan of your social security card and your newly renewed driver license to list you as the primary beneficiary." I had handed those documents over without a second thought. I had even felt a rush of profound gratitude. He was not protecting my future. He was harvesting the keys to my financial execution. Any normal person would have picked up the phone right then, dialed his number, and screamed until their vocal cords tore. The urge to confront him, to demand to know how a father could butcher his own daughter in such a calculated manner, was an agonizing physical pressure in my chest. But the frantic, grieving daughter was quickly silenced by the cold, calculating risk analyst. If I confronted a fraudster before securing my perimeter, they would destroy the evidence and vanish. Arthur was no longer my father. He was a hostile threat actor. Operating in pure survival mode, I logged into secure portals and pulled complete, unredacted credit reports from all 3 major bureaus. The mortgage was just the crown jewel of his operation. Buried beneath it were 2 separate platinum credit cards, both carrying enormous limits. Both were completely maxed out. The total balances hovered around $65,000, mostly from luxury furniture stores, premium pool installation companies, and high-end boutique grocers located in the southern states. My pristine 810 credit score, which I had spent a decade painstakingly building, was entirely decimated. By dawn, I knew I needed eyes on the ground. I could not rely on the bank or local police who might tip him off. I searched through corporate security directories and found Declan Reed, a veteran private investigator based in Texas. His background was ex-military, and his firm specialized in corporate espionage and high-stakes asset tracing. I wired him a retainer fee and sent him the Cypress Ridge address. "I need to know exactly who is occupying this property," I instructed him over a secure, encrypted line. "Do not engage, just give me names, faces, and the current operational status of the house." The waiting period was a unique kind of psychological torture. For 48 hours, I went to work, drank my coffee, attended risk assessment meetings, and pretended my reality had not been entirely vaporized. I smiled at my colleagues while my internal world burned to the ground. When Declan's encrypted file finally landed in my inbox on Thursday evening, it struck with the force of a physical blow. The attached report was painfully thorough. The Cypress Ridge estate was not a vacant property, nor was it being rented out to unsuspecting tenants. The primary resident was Arthur. I clicked open the surveillance photographs. There was my father, looking easily 10 years younger and healthier than I had ever seen him. He was standing on the pristine, sun-drenched driveway of a massive stucco mansion. He was not wearing his worn-out coats. He was dressed in a tailored linen shirt, laughing easily, holding a shiny new set of car keys. But it was the people standing next to him that finally shattered my sanity. Beside him stood a striking younger woman with dark hair, whom the investigator had identified as Vanessa. Clinging to Arthur's legs were two small children, a boy and a girl, neither of whom looked older than 6. In one photo, my father was lifting the little boy into the air, a picture-perfect portrait of suburban bliss. He had not just stolen my money. He had built an entirely new, secret second family over the last 4 years. He was funding their luxurious, sun-soaked life using the stolen identity, the credit, and the invisible labor of his biological daughter. He had buried me alive so that they could thrive. The very next evening, the suffocating walls of my own apartment became too much to bear. The digital photographs from the private investigator were burned into my retinas, but a part of my brain, the irrational, human part that still remembered bedtime stories and scraped knees, demanded physical proof. I grabbed my car keys and drove out into the freezing Seattle night, heading straight for the suburban complex where I believed my father lived. I parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, pulling my coat tight against the biting wind. He was currently in Texas, so I knew the place would be empty. I pulled out the spare brass key he had given me years ago, a key he claimed was strictly for emergencies in case his heart condition ever flared up. Another lie. I slid the key into the deadbolt. It turned with a heavy click, and I pushed the door open, stepping into the dark. I flipped the light switch, and the reality of his deception hit me with the force of a physical blow. At first glance, the small living room looked normal, but the silence in the air felt wrong. It was too sterile. I walked into the cramped kitchen and pulled the refrigerator door open. A blast of warm, stale air greeted me. It was unplugged. Inside, there was absolutely nothing except a single, unopened box of baking soda sitting on the wire rack. I opened the pantry cabinets. Empty. I walked into the bathroom and ran my finger along the inside of the porcelain sink. A thick layer of undisturbed dust coated my fingertip. There were no water spots on the mirror, no damp towels, no discarded razor blades. I moved into the bedroom and slid open the closet doors. 3 faded, moth-eaten flannel shirts hung rigidly on wire hangers, accompanied by 1 pair of scuffed imitation leather shoes. That was it. The horrifying truth washed over me. No one lived here. This apartment was not a home. It was a theatrical stage. It was a hollow, meticulously maintained movie set. He paid rent on this empty box solely to maintain his cover story. He would fly in from Texas for 2 or 3 days a month, put on his threadbare costume, play the role of the impoverished, hard-working, self-sacrificing father for me and our extended relatives, and then he would fly back to his sun-drenched mansion and his brand-new family. The sheer sociopathy required to maintain such an elaborate, physical lie made my blood run cold. I dropped to my knees, feeling blindly under the heavy oak bed frame. My hands brushed against cold steel. I dragged out a heavy, fireproof lockbox. It had a digital keypad. My fingers hovered over the buttons for only a second before I typed in the obvious code: month, day, and year of my birth. The green light flashed, and the heavy lid clicked open. Inside lay the mechanics of my destruction. The box was stuffed with thick, yellow legal pads. I pulled the first one out and flipped the heavy cover back. Page after page, line after line, top to bottom, I saw my own name staring back at me. It was a chilling, chronological diary of a masterclass in forgery. The first few pages showed clumsy, jagged attempts to mimic the sharp loops of my signature, but as I flipped deeper into the notebooks, the handwriting smoothed out, becoming more confident, more fluid. By the fifth notebook, the signatures were absolutely indistinguishable from my own. I was looking at thousands of repetitions, hours and hours of his life, sitting in this dark, empty apartment, practicing how to perfectly steal my identity. Every stroke of his pen was a deliberate, premeditated act of violence against his own child. But the notebooks were not the most dangerous thing in the safe. Beneath the yellow pads sat a thick manila folder bulging with printed documents. I pulled them out, spreading them across the dusty carpet. They were printed email threads, internal banking memos, and a printed resume. I picked up the resume. The name at the top belonged to Vanessa, his new young wife. My eyes locked onto her employment history. For the past 8 years, she had been employed as a senior risk underwriter for a major national mortgage lender. Suddenly, the impossible logistics of the crime made terrifying perfect sense. I had spent days agonizing over how an ordinary civilian could push a $500,000 mortgage through a strict banking compliance department without the primary applicant ever appearing on a video call, stepping foot in a branch, or triggering an identity alert. The answer was sitting right in front of me. Vanessa was not just a trophy wife reaping the benefits of my ruined credit. She was the architect. She worked in the exact industry that approved the loan. Vanessa knew every blind spot in the system. She knew exactly which verification steps could be bypassed with a manual override, which automated fraud flags could be silenced, and how to structure the debt to avoid triggering early warning alerts to the major credit bureaus. They were a perfectly synchronized criminal team. Arthur provided the victim, the social security number, and the forged signatures. Vanessa provided the weapon and the inside knowledge to pull the trigger without making a sound. Sitting on the floor of that fake apartment, the last remaining thread of my childhood completely snapped. I was not just a victim of a desperate man making a selfish choice. I was a human sacrifice. I was nothing more than raw material, harvested by an organized, professional, and utterly cold-blooded syndicate. The immense love I had felt for my father, the profound grief we supposedly shared over my mother, all of it had been weaponized to bleed me dry. I gathered the notebooks and the folder, packing them carefully into my leather tote bag. I stood up, walked out of the apartment, and locked the door behind me, leaving the stage exactly as I found it. The grieving daughter who had unlocked that door was dead. The risk analyst walking out into the freezing rain was going to burn their entire world to ash. I chose the most expensive steakhouse in downtown Seattle for our performance. The lighting was dim, casting sharp shadows across the white linen tablecloths, and the air was thick with the quiet hum of wealth and privilege. I arrived 30 minutes early, taking a seat in a secluded corner booth. I ordered a glass of ice water and waited. My pulse a slow, rhythmic drumbeat in my ears. In my designer handbag rested the manila folder. It felt as heavy as an anvil. I had called him 2 days prior, my voice dripping with manufactured excitement, to announce a sudden promotion to senior director at Aegis Core Security. I told him I wanted to celebrate, just the two of us. The trap was set, to maintain his grand illusion. The devoted, struggling father had no choice but to book a flight from Texas, return to his empty Seattle apartment to change into his worn-out costume, and meet me for dinner. Right on time. Arthur walked through the heavy mahogany doors. He was wearing the same faded gray sports coat he always wore to our dinners. He spotted me, and his face broke into a wide, beaming smile. The performance was flawless. If I had not seen the truth with my own eyes, I would have sworn he was the proudest parent in the world. He hurried over, pulling me into a tight embrace. The scent of his cheap cologne, a scent that used to mean safety and home, now made my stomach churn. "Look at you," he beamed, taking his seat across from me. "Senior Director, I always knew you were destined for greatness. Cora, I am so incredibly proud of you. Your mother would be weeping with joy right now." He invoked her name. My dead mother. He used her memory as a prop. I dug my fingernails into my palms under the table to keep my hands from trembling. I forced a warm smile and thanked him. We ordered our food, and for the first 45 minutes, I played along. I listened to him spin fabricated tales about his exhausting consulting trips, nodding sympathetically as he described the terrible hotel food and the lonely nights on the road. The sheer stamina required for his deception was staggering. He was a master manipulator, holding court with the easy grace of a seasoned actor. When the waiter cleared our plates and poured our coffee, I decided it was time to change the script. "So, with this new promotion comes a substantial salary bump," I began, keeping my voice light and conversational. "I have finally decided to stop renting. I am going to buy a house here in the city." Arthur froze. It was a microscopic reaction, a slight stiffening of his shoulders, but my trained eyes caught it. He quickly recovered, lifting his coffee cup. "That is wonderful news, sweetheart. Real estate is a very solid investment. Have you started looking at neighborhoods?" "I have," I replied, leaning forward slightly. "But something very strange happened yesterday. I went to the bank to get pre-approved for a mortgage, and the loan officer flagged my file. He said there is a massive anomaly on my credit report, a huge, unexplained debt." I watched his face closely. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. His eyes darted toward the exit for a fraction of a second before locking back onto mine. The mask was slipping, but he desperately clawed to keep it in place. "An anomaly?" he asked, his voice tighter, an octave higher than normal. "Well, you know how these massive credit bureaus are. They make administrative errors constantly. Identity mix-ups happen every single day. It is probably just a technical glitch." "A technical glitch that dropped my score by 300 points, I pressed, my tone completely flat. He reached across the table, attempting to place his hand over mine, but I pulled my hand away. He ignored the rejection, leaning in with a look of deep, paternal concern. "Listen to me, Cora. Do not panic. You know I have extensive connections in the financial sector from my consulting work. Let me handle this for you. Do not call the authorities. Do not call the bank back. If you stir up a hornet's nest, they might freeze your legitimate accounts. Just give me a few days to make some calls, and I promise I will make this whole misunderstanding disappear. You just focus on your new job." The gaslighting was breathtaking. He was actively trying to convince me not to investigate my own financial ruin, painting himself as the savior while digging my grave. The audacity extinguished the last flickering ember of my restraint. "I do not think your connections can fix this, Arthur," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial whisper. I reached into my bag and pulled out the crisp, white collections notice. I slid it across the table. It stopped directly in front of his coffee cup. The bold red letters demanding $560,000 glared up at him. He stared at the paper. He did not blink. He did not speak. The silence stretching between us was absolute, heavy enough to crush bone. Then, I reached into the folder and pulled out the glossy, 8x10 photographs the private investigator had taken. I laid them out, one by one, like a dealer dealing a hand of poker. First, the sprawling stucco mansion in Cypress Ridge. Next, the photo of him holding the little boy. Finally, the picture of him and Vanessa, standing in the sun, smiling. "Is Vanessa going to help you fix my credit?" I asked, my voice slicing through the quiet restaurant like a scalpel. "Or maybe the kids can chip in for the overdue mortgage." I expected him to break. I expected a tearful confession, a desperate plea for forgiveness, or even a panicked denial. I expected the facade of the loving father to crumble into the pathetic reality of a broken man. I was wrong. Arthur slowly leaned back in his leather chair. The panic vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, reptilian stillness. The warm, fatherly persona evaporated, and for the first time in my 34 years of life, I saw the real monster lurking beneath the skin. He looked at the photographs, then looked up at me, his expression completely devoid of guilt. "You have no idea how much it costs to raise a child," he said, his voice stripped of all emotion. "I sacrificed the best years of my life for you after your mother died. I gave up my youth, I gave up my freedom, I made sure you went to the best schools, made sure you never went hungry, made sure you had the perfect little life so you could become the high-powered executive you are today." He tapped the collections notice with his index finger. "You owe me this. This is my reward. You work at a massive corporation. You make a six-figure salary, and you have no dependents. What is wrong with carrying a little debt so your father can have a decent, comfortable life in his old age? I earned that house. Cora, I earned that money." The sheer delusion, the sociopathic entitlement, washed over me. He genuinely believed that my identity was his property. "You stole $500,000 and ruined my life," I stated. "I took what was owed to me," he snapped back, his voice rising, carrying a sharp edge of malice. "And what exactly are you going to do about it? Are you going to call the police? Are you going to stand in a courtroom and tell a judge you want to send your own flesh and blood to federal prison? You would not dare. You do not have the stomach to destroy your own family." He was still trying to manipulate me. He was gambling on my conscience, banking on the biological tether that he assumed still bound me to him. He thought I was weak. I calmly stood up from the table. I pulled a crisp $100 bill from my wallet and dropped it onto the white linen to cover my portion of the meal. I looked down at the man who had created me, feeling nothing but a profound, freezing emptiness. "I do not have a father," I said, every word a definitive, irreversible verdict. "From this exact moment on, you are just a criminal." I turned my back on him and walked out into the cold Seattle night, leaving him sitting alone with the ghosts of his own destruction. The morning after the dinner, I did not go to work. I drove directly to the regional field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, carrying the heavy tote bag filled with Arthur's handwritten journals and Vanessa's corporate history. I also filed a comprehensive report with the Federal Trade Commission, because the fraudulent mortgage originated in Texas while I resided in Washington state. The crime crossed state lines. It was no longer just a domestic dispute. It was federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and bank fraud. The agents I spoke with took one look at the meticulous forgery notebooks and immediately opened an active criminal investigation. Arthur and Vanessa were not going to go down quietly. They realized I had not made an empty threat at the restaurant. They sensed the federal net closing in, and like cornered animals, they launched a vicious counterattack. 3 days later, I stood at a grocery store checkout line and handed the cashier my debit card. It was declined. I tried my primary credit card. Declined. A cold panic gripped me. I stepped outside and called my bank, only to be informed that all my legitimate financial accounts had been frozen due to a reported loss of cards and suspected fraudulent activity. Arthur had weaponized my own security against me. He knew my mother's maiden name, the street I grew up on, and the name of my first pet. Armed with those answers and my social security number, either he or Vanessa had impersonated me over the phone, claiming my wallet was stolen. Their strategy was brutally effective. They were trying to cut off my financial oxygen, starving me of the liquid assets I needed to hire a ruthless federal attorney. They wanted to paralyze me before the government could indict them. but they underestimated the resources I had at my disposal. I did not waste time arguing with standard customer service representatives. I drove straight to the Aegis Core Security headquarters and walked into the office of our chief legal counsel. I explained the situation, laying out the federal statutes my father had violated and the retaliatory financial lockdown I was currently suffering. My company did not hesitate. The legal team immediately dispatched aggressive cease and desist orders to my banks, accompanied by sworn affidavits and my corporate identification, instantly restoring my access to my funds. Simultaneously, our cybersecurity division executed a comprehensive military-grade freeze on my entire credit profile, locking it down with dual authentication protocols that even Vanessa could not bypass. The bleeding was finally stopped. With my assets secured, the FBI agents were able to accelerate their forensic audit of the Texas property transaction. 2 weeks into the investigation, the lead federal agent called me into his office to review a newly uncovered piece of evidence. He slid a photocopy of the final loan authorization page across his metal desk. He pointed to the bottom right corner, right beneath my flawlessly forged signature. There was a notary public stamp, verifying that I had been physically present in the state of Texas to sign the papers in person. I stared at the name printed inside the official seal. The room started to spin. The notary was Marcus Vance. Since I was a little girl, I had called him Uncle Marcus. He was Arthur's oldest and best friend, the man who used to bring me presents on my birthdays and sit at our dining table every Thanksgiving. He had watched me grow up, and yet, for a cut of the stolen money, he had stamped his official government seal on a lie, legally swearing he had verified my identity when I was thousands of miles away. The betrayal was a sprawling, interconnected web. But Uncle Marcus was not a hardened criminal mastermind. He was a coward. When federal agents raided his small accounting office in suburban Houston, threatening him with 30 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit bank fraud, Marcus did not even make it to a holding cell before he broke. He collapsed in the interrogation room, sobbing uncontrollably. To save himself from a life sentence, he immediately agreed to turn state's evidence. He handed the federal prosecutors the final, devastating weapon we needed. Marcus provided a hard drive containing 3 years of unencrypted email chains between Arthur and Vanessa. The messages detailed their entire premeditated conspiracy, from the initial selection of my Social Security number to the specific tactics Vanessa used to bypass the underwriting algorithms. There was no more room for gaslighting. The walls had completely closed in on them. The federal courthouse in downtown Seattle was an imposing fortress of polished marble and dark mahogany. Sitting in the gallery, the air felt sterile, a fitting environment for the clinical dissection of a monster. When the trial finally commenced, Arthur attempted to execute one last, desperate performance. Taking the stand, he transformed into a frail, weeping old man. He hunched his shoulders, letting tears stream down his face as he addressed the judge. He swore he had been manipulated. He pointed a trembling finger at Vanessa, claiming she had used her industry knowledge to brainwash him, that he was just a lonely, foolish father who had made a terrible mistake in the name of love. Throughout his testimony, his eyes kept darting toward me, silently pleading for the daughter he thought he still owned to intervene, to feel pity, to save him. I sat perfectly still. I felt absolutely nothing. But his pathetic strategy backfired spectacularly. Vanessa was a seasoned corporate underwriter. She was not about to become a sacrificial lamb for a sinking ship. When her defense attorney called her to the stand, her face was a mask of pure vengeance. She looked directly at Arthur, then turned to the judge and presented her final, devastating piece of evidence. Arthur was not just trying to steal a house, she testified, her voice echoing clearly across the vast room. He had a contingency plan in case the mortgage defaulted and the bank initiated foreclosure. She submitted documents proving that, shortly after securing the Texas property, Arthur had secretly purchased 2 massive life insurance policies in my name. He had forged my signature again, listing himself as the sole beneficiary. The combined payout would have been over $2 million. He told me, Vanessa continued, her words landing like physical blows. That if the financial pressure became too much, Cora could always suffer a tragic, fatal accident, the insurance money would clear the debt, and we would be free. The entire courtroom went dead silent. The judge stopped writing. The court reporter's hands froze over her keyboard. I felt the air leave my lungs. The man who had raised me, the man who had kissed my forehead every night after my mother died, had put a literal price tag on my life. I was not just his financial battery, I was his sacrificial lamb. He was a ruthless, calculating potential murderer. When the prosecutor called me to the stand to deliver my victim impact statement, my legs were steady. I walked past the defense table, deliberately refusing to acknowledge his existence. I looked only at the judge. "Your Honor," I began, my voice ringing with absolute clarity. "The man sitting in this room is a stranger to me. He systematically dismantled my financial security, weaponized my grief, and plotted to profit from my death. I have no father. I have no family sitting at that table. I stand before you today not to ask for closure, but to demand justice. I ask that you impose the maximum penalty allowed by federal law. Burn his world to the ground, just as he tried to burn mine." The gavel fell with a satisfying, thunderous crack. The judgment was merciless. Arthur was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Vanessa received a 5-year sentence for her role as the architect of the fraud. Their sun-drenched illusion in Texas shattered instantly. Without the stolen funds to maintain the facade, the bank foreclosed on the Cypress Ridge mansion within weeks. The second family he had built on the graveyard of my future was swiftly evicted, thrown out onto the street with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The empire of lies was reduced to dust. 18 months have passed since that day in court. Rebuilding the fortress took time, but I am a risk analyst. I know how to patch vulnerabilities. After countless hours of legal negotiations and bureaucratic battles, the fraudulent mortgage was entirely expunged from my record. My credit score returned to a perfect 810. I did not just survive the financial assassination, I thrived. I received another promotion at Aegis Core Security. Using my own hard-earned money, I purchased a stunning top-floor apartment overlooking the deep blue waters of Elliott Bay. I sit here now, looking out at the Seattle skyline, completely untethered from the ghosts of my past. On my sleek glass desk sits a single white envelope. The return address is a federal penitentiary in California. It is a handwritten letter from Arthur. It arrived in the mail this afternoon. I hold the envelope in my hand. I look at his familiar handwriting for exactly 3 seconds. I do not feel anger. I do not feel sadness. I feel absolute, unshakable peace. Without opening it, I drop the letter directly into the motorized paper shredder next to my desk. I listen to the mechanical whir as his words are sliced into thousands of meaningless, unreadable ribbons. He will spend the next decade rotting in a concrete box, desperately waiting for a reply that will never come. My absolute silence is his true life sentence. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Maya Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.